Oh, Brad, what have you done now?
I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
Don't carry a 00 number. It means you're licensed to kill, not get killed.
Welcome to Jamaica, Mr. Bond.
News of my arrival leaked.
Who are you working for? We didn't advertise it.
What else do we know about this Chinese gentleman?
Nothing except his name, Dr. No.
I'm a member of Spectre. World domination. Same old dream.
Why is he still alive?
Our attempts failed.
We're not going to fail again.
I thought you'd turn up sooner or later.
Very clever, Mr. Bond.
It's a Smith & Wesson, and you've had your 6.
What are you doing here? Looking for shells?
No, I'm just looking. I thought there might even be a place for you with Spectre. And I'm flattered. I prefer the revenge department. I never fail, Mr. Bond.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bond, James Bond, with your host, Mike Kalinowski, and myself, Brad Gilmore, promoting our brand new book, Bond, James Bond, exploring the shaken and stirred history of Ian Fleming's 007. This will be a limited podcast series that will dive into every single James Bond movie, and we will break them down. We will give our opinions, our hot takes, or whatever comes across our mind in the world of MI6's greatest secret agent, James Bond, 007. We hope that you enjoy the podcast, so much so that you go to bondjamesbondbook.com and order our brand new book, available on bondjamesbondbook.com or wherever books are sold. Let's enjoy the podcast. Today we're talking about 1962's Dr. No, where James Bond 007, a British secret agent, has been sent to Jamaica to investigate the disappearance of British agent John Strangeway and his secretary. Once arriving, 007 becomes suspicious of scientist Professor Dent, who was the last person to have seen Strangeway before he disappeared. After learning Professor Dent is working for a terrorist with a metal hand, Dr. No, and Strangeway is dead, 007 meets CIA agent Felix Leiter and his assistant Quarrel in Jamaica. 007 and Quarrel head to the tropical island Crab Key. After encountering the beautiful Honey Ryder underneath the mango tree, 007 finds the island is actually Dr. No's secret lair. When 007 and Honey are captured and Quarrel is killed, James Bond then learns Dr. No has been disrupting the American rocket launches at NASA, and he is out for world domination as a part of the terrorist group Spectre. He wants to unleash his vengeance on the United States of America. Can James Bond defeat Dr. No and save the world? We discuss right now. And here we are right now to talk about the first of the many James Bond movies, Dr. No, 1962, what started it all, starring Sean Connery as James Bond in the titular role as James Bond 007. This was the one that started it all, Mike. This was the first one, really, if you don't count the 50s Casino Royale. This is the first time we see James Bond hit the big screen.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, it's got to be for both of us because we didn't experience this in the theater. Where did you, in the order of Bond, let's say this, like in the order of you discover Bond, you see him with your, how did this film come to you?
This must have been, so the first Bond movie I saw was Diamonds Are Forever. That's my Bond mitzvah, as I call it. My Bond mitzvah was Diamonds Are Forever. And then at the same time, I think that everybody's Bond is kind of like whatever age they were. I mean,
absolutely.
Everybody's Bond is also like whoever's James Bond at the, when you first discover it, that's your Bond. So for me, it was Pierce Brosnan. So the first Bond movie I saw was Die Another Day in theaters. And then I started watching the Brosnans, and it was my dad who said, hey, you had this Diamonds Are Forever movie that you like so much. This guy did other ones. And I was like, oh yeah? And so that's when we started watching them. And I think we did it out of order. So Dr. No probably came, I don't know, 5 or 6, maybe 7 movies into me watching Bond. But it's actually one that I go back to, maybe it's top 3 that I go back to the most. This one. Okay. Now I know what about you? Where did you first see Dr. No?
It was, for me, it was, Octopussy was the first Bond film I saw in theaters.
Oh,
so
nice.
Roger Moore was my Bond. And so I just, of course, went through all his. And especially being at the age I was, so young, and like Moonraker was really big to me just because it was flashy and whatnot. And as I got a little older, the For Your Eyes Only, Spy Who Loved Me. And then I want to say, and then I kind of grew into Dalton later. Then Connery came later. Connery was probably right around the time of of course I knew Connery, and you know the films, but back then it's kind of funny to think about. There's no internet back then. Like when I was discovering these films pre GoldenEye, and as always going to Suncoast for the VHS,
Suncoast,
MGM, whoever had it, MGM or UA, whoever had it at the time, they would always release like the box set, and they all look so cool with all the cover arts. So for me, they talk about don't judge a book from its cover. For the Bond films, it was always like, this is the cool cover. But I don't think Dr. No's was very flashy, so I didn't pick it up till much later. And I was like, oh, it's the first one. I should go back and watch it. And then you're kind of, I don't want to say jaded, but those films did look a little weird. It's funny to think if people watch like GoldenEye right now, would they look at it and go, huh, that's kind of weird. They dress weird and this and that. And I'm so curious to talk to so many people through this book about discovering Bond and what the past looks like to them. Because the Connery films were always so weird to me, and they just I didn't have that. Well, he was the first, he was the best. I came from a different place, so it was much later that I came to Dr. No and appreciated it for being the first and what they did with it, but it's not really up in my top favorites.
Yeah, I know. And in the book, Mike and I we talk about we rank our James Bond actors and films. So we won't reveal yet where our rankings are. But let's just say, what's funny is, and this isn't giving it away, but you and I almost have the same exact ranking, except for the first and the last are flipped.
I know.
It's the same every other way, but our favorite and our least favorite are flipped on our list. So it's going to be interesting to get into. And I'm sure readers are going to have their opinions on it. But Dr. No does so many things right, I think, for James Bond. It doesn't have the classic theme song really to intro. We didn't really get that till From Russia with Love, but really properly with Goldfinger. But we got the gun barrel. We got the cold open. And we got M. We got the leather bound door, which I always thought was great. I've never seen a door like that in person, but we got that.
No, never. Where is that stuff? It's like you never see that. I was reading something on like No Time to Die, and there's like we changed the leather from red to brown or brown to red. I forget what they're talking about because it was felt a little stuffy, and I was just like, I don't think I've ever seen a leather bound door ever.
Yeah, it doesn't exist in real life, at least to my knowledge.
Yeah.
What to you about the Bond formula sticks out the most? What do you think that they really nailed in Dr. No?
It's funny that, people talk about From Russia with Love, like they say, like a classic spy film. And it's so funny to think that I feel Dr. No, you got Goldfinger, they say was the template for Bond. Like that set, the over the top villain with his overly complicated plan and the Bond girls and this and that and the henchmen. And they always say that From Russia with Love was like the true kind of spy novel. I feel Dr. No kind of, he had, a villain with a plan, that he had, the layer that Ken Adams designed, the beautiful layer that we think of when we think James Bond. So there are a lot of things that were there that then weren't there from Russia with Love, which was interesting to me. So they did kind of go a little hard. Like I love the scene when he loses his gun and they give him the Walther at the beginning. They take the gun from him. Like, you don't need that. We give you a Walther.
I think he had a Beretta, and I think they called it a ladies'
it was
gun.
a lady's gun or something. I know we talked about it in the book, and I don't want to say it was a Beretta. I don't know. I don't know if it's in 1911 or 1119. I'm
like
a
that.
Gun aficionado, but they that always stuck to me, even as a kid, because the Walther, that's Bond.
Right.
To me, the Walther is his weapon. So to see that, I was like, oh, I never knew that. But of course, it's in the books and whatnot. But to see that happen and be faithful in the books, it's kind of really cool to see.
One thing that stuck out to me when I was watching the entire series, but this movie in particular, when researching the book and adding kind of my commentary on all the films, is the score. Obviously, this is the first time we hear the John Barry, James Bond, right? It's the first time we really hear it. Well, obviously, it's the first movie. And they must have really loved this composition and knew that this was great because they play it like 40 times in the movie. Like James Bond is walking from the airport to the car, and it's do 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 do. I mean, he's unpacking his suitcase in the hotel, and they're playing the theme song. That kind of stuck out to me. But what I really love too is there's kind of this, and we'll talk about it as we talk about each movie. But there's this kind of, I don't know, theory out there that James Bond isn't really a good secret agent.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And guess what? There's plenty of reason that you could make that argument.
Right.
Didn't you not love though seeing, some of the things that he did in this movie to like when he got to his hotel room, like taking a piece of his hair out and putting it over the closet door,
right,
so that you would know if someone came in the closet. I kind of love the little spy things that happen in the movie.
Yeah. And we talk a lot about how Bond is such a time capsule of the period and whatnot. And, it was a different time back then, the Cold War and everything and what it meant to be a spy. So it was great to see that. And I think that's what's, I don't want to say low tech of Bond, but it was a low tech Bond and it worked. It was just kind of him, his wits and whatnot. And it worked. It worked for the time, it worked for the picture. And you got to respect that. You got to kind of respect what they did.
So we also got really the first Bond girl, the aside from Lois Maxwell, we got Honey Ryder, played by Ursula Andress. And
yes,
I know we also go into our favorite Bond women in the book.
Yep.
And there's a lot of, I was actually thinking about some of the women that I didn't even mention today.
There's just like, when you think of Bond woman, okay, everyone's like, oh, the leading ladies. But there's just like to Bond in general, you are in the movie, you're a Bond girl. And there's so many lesser known roles. I don't even say lesser known roles, but sometimes there may be glorified cameos, but they're Bond women. And there's just so many of them. And you kind of forget over time of so many of how many there were and the importance to the film or their appearance or what they meant to certain people.
Yeah, I agree. And even if you look at, I know we're jumping ahead a little bit, but like Casino Royale, I think her name's Solange in the movie.
On the beach, yeah.
Yeah, but she's only there for maybe 5 minutes of screen time, if that, 3 minutes of screen time, or less.
Yeah.
But that's a Bond woman.
In our rankings, I put someone in there that people are going to be like, who? What?
Yeah.
But it just, what we watch and how these movies affect us. That's what's so good about them. Like, it's funny. I don't know if you've been noticing this on Twitter lately. I don't know if because I tweeted out about our book or something, but Bond has been constantly in my thread. And from people I don't follow and don't follow me, but I'm like getting the rankings of the films and this and that. And even though people are vastly different on their favorite films, their favorite actors, their favorite Bond girls, but no one gets hostile towards each other about it. No one's like, are you kidding me? You like that movie? Here's your Bond, this and that. It's like this so respectful community. And I love that about Bond. I think it's so great. We all have our different and our favorites, and everyone's like, oh, okay, I understand that.
Well, cool. You come from the Star Wars subculture online, and you can't even say your favorite color lightsaber without sparking debate.
Oh, there you go. That's exactly right.
Let alone movie or Bond. But going to the Bond women, Ursula Andress to me when she comes out of the water in the orange bikini with the knife on her side,
Yeah.
I really think as far as first efforts go, I can't imagine hitting it out of the park any better than that.
I'm trying to think of a girl that had a better intro than that one. A Bond leading lady. I'm trying to Halle Berry had the kind of homage, which was an homage.
Yeah, it's the same entrance.
I mean, Craig then had his homage to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to think. Like I talk about it in the book about one that sticks to me and why it does. But I've got it pulled up on my IMDb right now, and there she is doing that same scene right there.
Yeah.
It's classic and just can't be beat.
Now in every Bond movie, there's always like the person who helps him throughout the journey. You know, we meet Felix Leiter for the first time in this one, played by Jack Lord. Jack Lord really rocking the cat eye sunglasses in the movie, like really sticking to him. And then there's also Quarrel, who's his kind of helper and the guy who's a little bit afraid of this dragon that we hear about on the island. What did you think of this rendition of Felix Leiter?
I love the character of Felix Leiter. I think he doesn't. I was so glad with Jeffrey Wright to be able to come back multiple times and to give him kind of agency and build the character, because the character it's a great character. You know, sometimes he's just shown up to kind of, I don't want to say be a buffoon of the CIA where Bond, shows how good he is, but I always thought they always worked well when they're kind of equals. They're vastly different characters, but they're also on the same, I would say, two sides of the same coin. Would that be kind of like, he's not an American James Bond per se, but he's just as capable of him. And Jack Lord had a great, talk about casting. He looked like an American James Bond. He just was great and suave. And was this before Hawaii Five? It had been before.
I think it was before. I think it was like a few years before.
Yeah. And I'm looking at his headshot right now on the IMDb. He's like, yeah, he could have been James Bond. If he's British, sure, he would have been perfect. So I think they were a nice compliment to each other.
They really worked, and I don't know why they decided to kind of go away from that as Felix progresses as a character. Because by Goldfinger, and we'll talk about Goldfinger when we get there in the podcast, but by Goldfinger, he's like an old balding guy. You know what I mean? Yeah. I wonder why they made that choice.
I mean, we get to David Hedison a little bit, who does play it twice, and he was still older than Bond, a little more business. I don't want to say like business-y. And then the guy I liked, because I like the movie Living Daylights, I think it's John, either Tenney or Terry.
Mm-hmm. I think it's Tenney,
but he looked a little bit younger. But they really just did him dirty. They were like, yeah, we're gonna make you an incompetent. You just show up in your members only jacket and give Bond the info he needs.
I wonder if that's part of the reason though. Is Jack Lord was really awesome in this movie.
Yeah.
And I wonder if they said we can't have the audience wanting to see, especially the American audience wanting to see the American James Bond. We need to make this guy not as cool as James Bond.
Yeah. I'm sure that's 100% right. Yeah, it's like, yeah, okay. The next time, maybe not.
Yeah. Every Bond villain, go for it.
Real quick, Quirrell, did you I don't know if this is fan theory or not. Someone was saying that Quirrell and Sharky in License to Kill, someone was saying they're either related or
like their father and son
of him or something. Like, I don't remember where I was reading this when we were doing the research for this book, but someone, I was like,
I read that too.
That's interesting.
And I wonder the validity of it only because now, again, until we get to Daniel Craig, none of the continuity really matters at all.
Right. Yeah.
But I just wonder from a continuity standpoint, because I will give Eon Productions, the Everything or Nothing, the Harry Saltzman, Cubby Broccoli, who produce all the movies. I do give them some credit because every now and then they would get it in their mind of we need to make these movies connect a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like you have the scene of Roger Moore at Teresa Bond's grave.
Right. Yes,
and you have like some allusions to the character, but they're all connected, but not really. So I almost wonder if they would say this is Quarrel's son, because then it would kind of age Bond kind of significantly. Right.
And it adds, even though we're gosh, he'd been the fourth Bond at that point. It adds history to them. Like it instantly adds history to the relationship, you know, even though they didn't touch on it and to say, hey, remember that one time your dad and I and this and that. But it was a weird, like, it made sense. And it's like, okay, that would work, you know?
Let me ask you, with this being the first James Bond, did you have any issues with him already being James Bond when the movie starts and we don't see any kind of origin of the character? Because you don't get the origin until Casino Royale.
No, I always like, I don't know if films when they're talking about characters do an over reliance on origins, but sometimes it just, you know, and I don't know if I'll ever want to see, you know, Bond in the Navy and stuff like that. I don't know, because what makes Bond is the 00, and, you know, Casino Royale was about, I mean, just that brief little prologue in the black and white. I mean, that's all I really needed. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think I would like to see it. There was a comic that touched on it a little bit, but I didn't stick with it too long because I was like, it's not my thing.
Yeah, I don't really need to see him. Yeah, in the ranks of the military.
Like, I mean, how many movies do we see of military guys, and to know where, you know? But I could be wrong. They could do a movie and it could be awesome, and I'll put my foot in my mouth.
We'll see. For me, Sean Connery, as soon as you see him on the screen, you automatically accept him. And he had something, absolutely. Whether he's your favorite Bond or not, I think that he does have this universal thing of, he seems believable from a physicality standpoint, right? Like, you feel like this guy could fight anybody. I mean, because Sean Connery legit must have been, 6'2", maybe 6'3". He looks like a tall gentleman.
Yeah.
You know, and I believe he was
They have his height here. Let's see here. Yeah, he's a, I believe he's a swimmer, right? I think it was his background was he was a swimmer, but definitely look athletic and like he knew, you know, look, he could handle. Like someone said it best, and I think it was in an interview or maybe one of the early reviews for the film. They're like, he's like a panther when he walks in that room. That first scene is like he's extremely capable of violence, and he doesn't do anything, and you still sense that about him. Like he had this capability, and I think that's one of the things he shared with Timothy Dalton. Is they both look like they could murder you with their bare hands. And I think you need that in Bond.
Yeah, and it's something that is very present in the Sean Connery Bonds overall. And actually, this was something during the research of our book that I found interesting about Sean Connery. He did swimming, and he also was a bodybuilder, Mr. Universe.
That's what it was. Yeah. That's what it was.
He was a bodybuilder. So he obviously was an athlete coming into the franchise or coming into the series. And I think you need to be able to sell that. What do you think, though, about Dr. No? Because every Bond villain, especially in the early ones, have their quirks about them. Dr. No, his hands were robotic, and he was an interesting guy who could hold a champagne glass with the greatest of ease, but couldn't grip or anything to save his life at the end.
Yeah. One is kind of like, okay, like... Joseph Wiseman, I'm like, all right, it was never like, and maybe to the point of the film, they never really made a thing about his nationality. So that was always kind of, are we doing a stereotype? Are we, you know, because in the book does kind of lead into like stereotypes that, you know, back then you didn't think about it, but nowadays you're like, oh, that's really not right. You know,
he's supposed to be Asian in the book. He's like, Asian.
Right, of almost like a Fu Manchu,
right?
The wrongful stereotype. So with Joseph Wiseman, I'm like, okay, was he an American? But he was an American actor, I think, and I want to say that. So I'm like, did they do something with makeup on him? Because I always thought he was Asian until I was old enough to go back and look at them. I'm like, oh, okay, that wasn't an Asian actor.
I actually think I was hearing because I think he had some sort of actually Asian background.
Okay.
I do believe so. See, I'm trying to see if I can find it real quick. I don't see it in his IMDb, but
Canadian, brought up in Canada, Montreal, Quebec, died in Manhattan. So yeah, I mean, see, but I'm looking at his picture right now, and I'm like, doesn't really look like he did in Dr. No.
True.
Kind of the same, you know, an earlier, like a nice headshot of him.
Right. Wow, he died in 2009.
He looks like you'd find him in Mad Men somewhere.
Definitely has that 1950 cigarette salesman vibe.
Yeah, he does. He really does. Totally not like. Let me see if you can see this picture here of him.
Yeah, look at him. Yeah, he's not a bad looking guy either.
Yeah, doesn't really look like Dr. No. So they
may have done some makeup.
They did something to him. Little cosmetic makeup effects. I don't know.
But of course,
again, the book is. They even were saying in the writing of the screenplay, they were like, yeah, there were some tropes that we were not going to do. And it was great that they had that kind of foresight that early on and something in the 60s there. So, yeah.
But we're also introduced to Spectre in this movie. Spectre, although I love the idea of a criminal enterprise that's kind of like Illuminati-esque, taking over the world and finding all these interesting ways for world domination.
Right.
The name Spectre sounds cool. Did you love the acronym of what it stood for? It's the Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Revenge, and Extortion. Terrorism, revenge, and extortion.
Extortion. I'm trying to sit there and think in my head, I'm like, what was it again? And because I was like, now there's like my head right now, because after we went over the review of the book, my head is like overload explosive. So like,
I know.
Trying to keep facts straight and names and dates and everything. And I'm just like, now Smersh was first, right?
Right.
And they couldn't use that because they wanted to go more, I think they wanted to kind of just get away from like political, and they want to kind of make it like an overarching bad guys instead of to like bad guys, Russians, this and there, you could tie a nationality to it. They want to just kind of make it this shady organization. And then with Spectre, but like, so like I always find it so funny when they make these bad guys names, and villains like that, and every spy genre. You're like, oh, you really wanted to spell something out there, huh?
Yeah.
Now, who's using that whole term? Like, who uses that?
They definitely.
I know the Craig one. They're like, we're just calling it Spectre. It's just the organization. We're not gonna is one department in charge of each letter, like. But it was cool, think about it. Back then in the 60s, there wasn't anything like this. We're spoiled. We think of spies movies and everything now and what's happened, but back then it was like it was new. It was and what I loved and I didn't think about it at the time. I completely didn't see it when No Time to Die came out, but the Safin's chemical farm, his poison factory, the scientists were wearing suits like Dr. No's. It was an homage. I didn't pick that up at all until I watched this great video on the homages in it. And I was like, that's fantastic.
Yeah, that's one that came to me later on a rewatch.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you just think, people talk about the design of Dr. No's lair, and that's in the 60s. Like, that was fantastic. Like, just his whole thing. And it did set up the fact, and we talked about, you just admitted how Bond films, there was never any continuity, but there was, in the sense that there was Spectre. It was always kind of there, and it was always felt looming. And these people were these different, I don't say henchmen, but they're different agents of Spectre. So it did lend a little bit of a continuity.
Ken Adams in the set design too was just out of this world. How great everything looked. I mean, when I watched it with my fiance, so she had never seen any of the Bond movies, so we're actually in the middle of watching them all chronologically. And it's one of the great things that stood out to her was how awesome the sets looked in the 60s. And I guess this would be they say that Jaws is the first blockbuster of the modern time. It's Jaws is the first blockbuster. Do. But I really think, is Bond not really the first blockbuster?
I hear that Jaws talk a lot, and I wasn't born yet, so I don't know. But I like how Goldfinger couldn't have been it.
Right.
Like to read what Goldfinger did at the time it came out with the Beatles Revolution, and and again, maybe that speaks to the fact that Bond is always kind of skewed towards a male, older demographic. So maybe it wasn't, whereas Jaws was that first one that like families were involved, moms, dads, women, children, men, everyone went to see Jaws. And it was, we all became afraid to go in the water, as they said that with that slogan.
Right.
So I don't know. I would have thought Goldfinger, but maybe it was kind of a little adultish. So the kids weren't involved and it didn't kind of take over like a Jaws and later a Star Wars.
So
I don't know.
It is interesting. These are a couple of trivia facts before we wrap up our little episode here. The stuff that we obviously talk about, some of this we talk about in the book, some we don't cover explicitly, but this is one that always stood out to me because we talk about the physical specimen of a Sean Connery, and this was an interesting trivia fact that Sean Connery actually was fitted for a toupee in this movie. He started losing his hair when he was 17 and began wearing a hairpiece in films in 1958. From Goldfinger onwards, he wore a full wig. But in this movie, he wore a dry toupee and a wet toupee when he was in the water. Is that not a little mind-blowing?
Dude, that, like, first of all, like, I knew he wore a toupee later in life. And I remember on the rewatch, I don't know, like, my best friend is a Connery guy, like you're a Connery guy. Like, Connery's his guy. And I go, did you ever notice Connery's hair in the first couple films? Like, you don't notice in Dr. No. From Rush with Love, it's like it's night and day from Dr. No. You're like, something happened. And then Goldfinger seems like the kind of one he had from then on. Yeah. But like from Rush with Love, there was something I was like, what? Because Dr. No looked real. If he was wearing a toupee, I couldn't tell.
Yeah, apparently he was.
I had no idea. I knew he always did wear one. But I never you see the change in those first three films. But I was like, well, okay, whatever. That for me is like it's kind of like the modern day MCU films. Like all those guys wear toupees just to kind of make them look like the character, not toupees, hair pieces, like to give them the look of the character. So Bond has such a specific look from Ian Fleming's version. So if they ever decided with the actor, they're just going to give him a wig. I was like, oh, nope, fine by me.
It's interesting,
but that's fascinating. I didn't know that. I just learned that now about the wet and dry ones.
Wet and dry ones. Also on Connery, his suits for the film were made at Savile Row by tailor Anthony Sinclair. We know Savile Row. He even mentions that in this movie. That's the tailor, but the Sinclair, his tailor, stated that a truly great and bespoke suit would be able to stand up to a good deal of abuse, such as grappling by the lapels, and still look great afterwards, or grabbing somebody by the lapels and looking great afterwards. They said to prove his point, Sean Connery was asked to sleep in his suit. When he woke up the next morning, he was stunned to know that it looked fantastic still.
That should have been their saying, like sales pitch, the kind of suit that could stand up to be grappled with.
Yeah.
With a scuff, defending your lady's honor, these suits will take a scuffle. And still look damn good. That's great. Great suit.
Couple more here that I thought was interesting. Sean Connery was actually the godfather to Ursula Andress' son after the making of this movie, Dimitri Hamlin. That was interesting. And the white bikini that she wore in this movie went on to sell in auction for 35,000 euros in 2001, and then was later sold again in another auction for 41,000 euros. That's pretty expensive bikini there.
Do you own any Bond memorabilia?
Like I don't.
Prop?
I don't either. I wish I did. I have Back to the Future stuff. I don't have any Bond things.
Every time there's a couple prop houses that every now and then, for some reason, I'm on some kind of like email list, and I'll get like the catalog, and they'll always give you like the starting bids, what they think it's going to start at or what it's going to start at, and I'm like, my God, but like. And maybe thank God I'm not into collecting, because I think I would go down that rabbit hole of certain films to just own certain props. But like there was one, it was like a GoldenEye auction, and they had like his Piton laser gun from the opening. I was like, it's like $15,000 starting. I'm like, yeah, it's all right. But there's just some pretty awesome stuff out there.
Last little bit of trivia on Dr. No was, of course, this is something that we know very well, that Ian Fleming didn't like the casting of Sean Connery as James Bond initially. He didn't like it mainly because Bond is English and Sean Connery was, of course, Scottish. You couldn't fool anybody there. And Sean came from a working class background. Bond was a refined, educated man, and he thought Connery was too rugged. But after he saw Dr. No, he ended up loving Sean Connery, so much so that in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the novel, that's where he first made it in print that Bond had Scottish origins. And kind of tied it all together, which I thought was real interesting.
It's funny, like as a kid watching these, I didn't even think anything of it. Didn't even think anything of it. His accent.
Oh, me neither.
Didn't bother me. Like, but it's a matter. Do you want to think of it? And there was not really a lot of outrage at the time. I was like, oh, he's Bond is. It just shows you the difference between people nowadays and back then. Like, because people always ask me, they're like, Mike, who would you cast as Bond nowadays? And And they're always like, would you cast so-and-so? I go, no, he's an American. I would absolutely not. I think, could he do a British accent? Absolutely, if he's a talented actor. But like, I think the outrage of an American playing one of the most famous British people of fictional characters of all time, I think would be not worth the hassle.
Only two Bonds were English proper, right? So Sean Connery was Scottish. George Lazenby was Australian. Roger Moore was English. Timothy Dalton was Welsh. Pierce Brosnan, Irish. And then Daniel Craig was English. So only two English James Bonds. Everybody else, though, was somewhat British, I guess.
Maybe they live like, as long as some kind of European accent in there, we're okay with it.
Yeah, we'll figure it
American
out.
in there, the hell with it. Hell with it if he's American.
So to wrap up, here's my final question for you on Dr. No, and let's see how close you can get. At the end of these episodes, I want to ask you what you think the Rotten Tomatoes score is of the Bond movie. So Dr. No, 1962, an hour and 50-minute runtime. And to help you out, I'm going to give you the audience score.
Okay.
And let's see how close you get. So the audience score for this movie, based on over 100,000 ratings, is an 82%.
Ooh, wow.
Where do you think the tomato meter is on it?
My gut told me 79%.
So with a certified fresh score based on 60 reviews, Dr. No, starring Sean Connery, has a 95% on Rotten Tomatoes, with the consensus saying, featuring plenty of the humor, action, and escapist thrills the series would come to be known for, Dr. No kicks off the Bond franchise in style. So there you go, 95%.
Damn. Shows you what I know about Connery's Bonds, man.
Well, we have more of Sean Connery as Agent 007 coming up in the podcast. Of course, you can get Mike and I's book available on Amazon and all your favorite book sites. It is called Bond, James Bond, exploring the shaken and stirred history of Ian Fleming's 007. Get it now. Mike, where can people follow you online?
Follow me at Mike Kalinowski. That's my Twitter. That's where I'm at.
And you can follow me at Brad Gilmore. Until next time, this has been Bond, James Bond. We'll see y'all next time.
Oh, Brad, what have you done now? Oh, Brad, what have you done now?